Whether it's eczema, arthritis, cancer, heart disease, digestive problems, diabetes, asthma, even Alzheimer's, they all have something in common, and that something is inflammation. Inflammation is at the root of these conditions. I'm Reese, and today we're going to be looking at answers to some of the questions I've had for a while, like, what is inflammation? What's it doing to my body? And how can we put it out? That's what we want to know. Why are we so fired up? We live in an era of abbreviations. Social media texting's full of them, and medical talk is not much different. We're going to hear some crazy abbreviations like CRP, IL-6, TNFA. If you haven't heard of those before, no worries. Dr. Sherzai refers to them as markers of inflammation. Some of these are from a family of molecules called cytokines, and you're going to hear that word again. Think of cytokines as a language of the immune system. They're chemical messengers that your immune system uses to communicate. They have their place, but they can get stuck on replay with the command to keep the fire of inflammation hot.
We have specialized cells in our body and in the brain that are responsible for the defense system. And they get activated when they realize that there's something going on. Now, they could be erroneously activated by, certain products that have been injected or have been introduced into that otherwise relatively healthy environment, and they just go haywire and awry, and they start attacking not only the foreign objects and the inciting element, but they start damaging the healthier parts of the brain as well. And so there is this crazy cascade that starts. And so it's the cells trying to get rid of even healthy cells, and they start increasing the secretion of certain chemicals, interleukin 1, 6, and there's different names for all these inflammatory markers. And this incredible process starts where it's a downward spiral of cells damaging cells, and as a result of that breakdown products of cells, the chemicals that are secreted damage other cells. And so it just continues until, one figures out what was the inciting event, and a plan is instituted to stop that cycle.
Well, most people think of acute inflammation in terms like a sprained ankle. It swells up, it gets red, and it's oftentimes very painful. But in health, oftentimes we're talking about chronic low-grade inflammation that's really it's systemic. It's throughout the whole body, and most of the time there's not really a lot of indicators for that. Now, you can do testing for it. You can do a SED rate, or erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is a very common test in medicine to look at if there's inflammation in the blood, which means everywhere, right? You can also do what's called a high sensitivity CRP or cardiac C-reactive protein test that measures a different type of inflammation. You can have a lot of one inflammation and none of another type of inflammation. So sometimes you have to test broadly. You can do interleukin 6. You can do tumor necrosis factor alpha. All these are different types of inflammation. Sometimes only one of them is present, and that means there's a problem, that there's this chronic irritation to your entire body that has to be addressed, because that means your brain is potentially being inflamed through the blood-brain barrier, your heart is being inflamed. In fact, inflammation is a much bigger risk factor to the heart in cardiovascular disease than is a high cholesterol. In fact, having a high cardiac CRP is at least twice as predictive of a problem or a risk factor as a high cholesterol. And so we need to make sure that we're addressing the underlying issues that are driving this irritant, inflammatory process throughout the body.
We look at something called the C-reactive protein, the CRP. It's one of the better markers for inflammation. And I will do this on a person that I do it rather routinely, because I want to know, is their problem just related to a hearing loss or dizziness or one of those things? Or do we have an underlying inflammatory response going on in the body? Inflammation is disease. And so you need to look at that to see. If you catch it early, you can turn things around. If it's end stage, then you got a diagnosis. That's the importance of inflammation.
Inflammation is a condition that can manifest in various ways, including heart disease. Dr. Wes Youngberg touched upon this topic, and now Dr. Facemeyer will discuss inflammation in relation to heart disease.
Heart disease is the #1 killer of Americans. Every 34 seconds, someone has a heart attack. And according to the American Heart Association, 1 in 3 people suffer from some sort of cardiovascular disease. And while heart disease is the #1 killer for men, 1 in 3 women have heart disease. And so we are very aware as women of breast cancer, but only 1 every 31 women die of breast cancer instead of 1 in 3 for heart disease. So when you focus only on cholesterol, you are having a huge problem. And thankfully, I think the research is catching up because we know that it's not just one risk factor or one problem. 50% of men and 64% of women have a heart attack without having any prior symptoms. So, and this is costing, the U.S. $109 billion annually. So cholesterol is not just the issue. And it's really relevant at this time to understand that, there is something called inflammation that is coming to the front line as one of the main problems in our heart disease world. And it starts in a cell that I have a picture for it, which is called the endothelial cell. And this endothelial cell, as you see, is just beautiful. I have magnified it. You can see inside the blood flow and the red blood cells. But the endothelial cell has this fine, tiny, one-layer lining. And these endothelial cells actually have tremendous impact in how cardiovascular disease develops. So it's not just cholesterol. Lipids are only a very tiny window to what is actually happening. We've been talking about inflammation, we've been talking about mitochondrial dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction, and the inflammation that happens in the arteries. So those tests are very limited. What I try to do is I try to do what's called a more extended and advanced lipid panel, because they actually can give you categories of each molecule. For example, HDL. Some patients have a 90 HDL. Oh, my HDL is so good. And when I do the advanced lipid, I see that the HDL that they have is the less beneficial. So not HDL is equal. We have 3 or 4 types. And, there is a lipidology actually a specialty. So I cannot really go into detail with this because this is just a vast subject. But I have to say that just knowing the amount of cholesterol you have, maybe the size of your molecules and the type is not enough. So thankfully, we have other markers of inflammation. And there is, I have requested these labs to my patients that are really trying to prevent a heart attack. It's a really good way of looking at inflammation into the cellular level. And there is a lab called the Cleveland Heart Lab that offers certain testing that actually can measure your TMAO. It can measure some byproducts of endothelial dysfunction. It can measure ApoB, which is actually more important than LDL, actually, which is another lipoprotein, and CRP. So what I do, for patients that have a lot of risk, I do more in detail testing. But CRP, just high sensitivity CRP, is a very simple and very helpful marker because it can tell you how inflamed your arteries are. There are urine tests that can show you inflammation. So we talk about, the leaky endothelium, remember? And this endothelium, when it leaks proteins. And it leaks one of the proteins in our bloodstream is albumin. And we measure microalbumin in the urine. And if it's high, we know, this endothelium is not working well. We really need to focus on repairing the endothelium. You get the inflammation. What is causing it? So don't think, oh, I'm going to get these 10 supplements, and all these vitamins are going to help. These antioxidants, there are many companies that, promote so many products. My patients come with different kinds of offering, saving, life-saving results. But honestly, if we keep eating the same foods and not going to bed on time and being on the internet until midnight, not exposing ourselves to the sun, not drinking enough water, no resting, things are not going to change no matter how many supplements you take. Cardiovascular disease is now an inflammatory disease. Yes, you can have plaque. Remember I talk about fire, right? For the fire, you need gas and you need the wood. So you can have wood, and you can have the cholesterol and maybe no wood, right? No wood, it's just very little. But if you have the gas and you have the spark, you create a fire.
So this is so important. Heart disease is not just about cholesterol. The lining of blood vessels is composed of cells, endothelial cells. The health of these cells is crucial. When the cells experience inflammation, the wall of the blood vessels can actually become leaky. That's what Dr. Facemeyer was referring to when she talked about leaky endothelium. I asked Dr. Facemeyer about her approach with her patients.
Well, I have a picture in mind when I approach my patients, and it's a big iceberg. And when I see a patient, I see the little tip when I have my first encounter. And I know that the complaints or the symptoms they are experiencing, they're only the surface of what is under. So I like to go to the root. That's my approach. And the other approach that I have, which I have a picture for it too, is this thumb being clapped with a wrench. And I remember going to a conference and giving this presentation, and I told the audience, I said, I have this patient that with this thumb that is clapped with a wrench, and he comes to you and tells you, doctor, I've been suffering pain, terrible pain and redness in this thumb. And you tell him, okay, well, take ibuprofen 3 times a day and come in a week. And he goes home and takes that ibuprofen and comes back and he says, it's not helping. Now it's not just red, it started to become blue. And he says, oh, maybe it's infected. Go and take some antibiotics. And another week passed and he comes back and said, it's not getting better. And I keep telling them the story about this poor man that is going to lose the thumb. And then finally, the doctor said, you need surgery. You need bypass surgery because, your thumb has no circulation. So we need to put a bypass, some circulation in there. And I asked them and I said, what should you do? And they all laughed, of course, and said, patient didn't need antibiotics. The patient didn't need anti-inflammatories. The patient didn't need a bypass surgery. We needed to get rid of the wrench, unclamp the thumb. So that's my approach. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find out if there is something that I can do as I talk to my patients about how to get rid of the cause rather than just address the symptom with drugs.
So what I hear her saying is that inflammation at the lining of our blood vessels is what we need to focus more on.
To explain it better, these endothelial cells have a compound called nitric oxide. They produce and interact with this compound. And nitric oxide actually decreases oxidative stress, decreases the formation of smooth cells. Because smooth cell is the one that when it's inflamed, is like a scar. When you go and cut yourself, all of these inflammatory cells come to the rescue and then decrease the inflammation, but then they leave something there, which is a scar. And that happens over and over again. Every time we light up a cigarette, every time we have, a fried food, every time we're under stress and our cortisol level is high, every time that we have a viral illness, at times all this inflammation takes place and the body keeps repairing. But when we repair, we actually scar the artery. So this nitric oxide is vital. It dilates the artery. So the health of the endothelial cell is key in preventing heart disease.
One of the ways we can support healthy nitric oxide production in the blood vessels is by eating green leafy vegetables. You know, chronic inflammation has always seemed a bit nebulous to me.
A little bit hard to put a finger on, and I think maybe that's because it's an important part of our design, so it's necessary. We need inflammation. When we're fighting an infection, we need some inflammation, which is designed to kill the infecting, bacteria or virus. We need inflammation when we've been injured. Let's say we've smashed our finger or sustained a cut. There's some inflammation that's necessary to bring blood flow to that wound, and factors that help the skin to regrow and heal up. So inflammation is a part of that and necessary.
Yeah, inflammation is so crucial to life, right? Inflammation, when we have an insult or an injury, the body calls in all the troops to come in and repair tissue or repair the damage or repair something that's happened. So from that perspective, inflammation is crucial to life.
Inflammation has a very important role in brain health in general, and as it pertains to the development of neurodegenerative conditions. So inflammation is a condition where, certain cells and neurochemicals are produced by cells and the supporting structures to get rid of any offensive material, whether it's an infection, a bacteria, fungus, or a foreign body. The body has the capacity to start attacking it and allow for the body to slowly and gradually heal itself. So we need inflammation for life and for sustenance of our functions. However, with the kind of lives that we're leading, we are exposed to way too much inflammation. And it's not even, bouts of inflammatory reactions, but there is constant inflammation.
We need inflammation in performing sensitive operations and missions, but as we heard, when it becomes chronic, it's damaging.
So we know 4 mechanisms that actually damage the brain. It's inflammation, oxidation, lipid dysregulation, and glucose dysregulation. What does that mean? Glucose dysregulation means that you have insulin resistance or diabetes that's not taken care of or treated, or even elevated sugar levels on a repeated basis has been shown to damage the brain. We did a study, one of the largest studies, NHANES, large database, looking at insulin resistance and cognitive decline in younger people, 50s. And we excluded diabetics. So people who had insulin resistance, which usually doesn't get treated, and they had lower cognitive state. So glucose dysregulation is a pathway. Inflammation is a big pathway. People who have traumatic brain injury, people who have infections repeatedly, even gingival disease on a chronic basis.
So oral health.
Oral health. We don't even think about that, but it does. That creates inflammation. And also inflammation is always usually a later pathway for the other pathways. So being aware of inflammation and what causes inflammation and eliminating that. Then we have lipid dysregulation, which we think is a big driver. We're talking about fat, especially saturated fat. Study after study after study shows that people who have high cholesterol have 57% increased risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. Yeah. Even borderline increased cholesterol, which usually people don't treat, have 35% greater risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. So lipid dysregulation is a critical component. In fact, one of the main genes associated with Alzheimer's, ApoE4, its function is lipid transport, but it does it poorly. So the risk goes up 4 times if you get one gene from one parent, 12 times if you get one gene from each parent. But it has to do with lipids, fats.
So pour into the mixing bowl inflammation, ROS, glucose dysregulation from insulin resistance, poor oral health. We've not only got increased risk of heart disease, but brain disease as well.
Inflammation is present in all chronic conditions and all chronic diseases, such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes and obesity. There's so-called subclinical inflammation going on, which means that our immune system is just producing some cytokines that increase inflammation. For example, in the arteries, that would be atherosclerosis, but also in other parts of the body, in the adipose tissue, which happens in obesity, in the adipose tissue or in the fat that's stored ectopically in the liver and in the muscle, in the pancreas, that would be in type 2 diabetes. And why does it even matter when our body produces too many cytokines that promote inflammation? It turns out that it's really disruptive for our immune system, which is turned down. It deploys some of the immune cells in the places where they're not needed as much. And for example, when cancer starts developing somewhere else, there's like not enough power to pay attention to what's happening somewhere else. So it's really important, not to exhaust our immune system on subclinical inflammation in our arteries and in the adipose tissue. It's much better to save all those forces for serious events like, for example, cancer, or when we fight a virus or bacteria, so that our immune system can be strong. When the immune cells start producing the cytokines, it's like sending messages, and the messages can be really powerful. They're directed to specific cells in the body and tell them some specific instructions what to do, how to fight the danger. Now, if we start producing these messages, these cytokines, in response to no danger, obviously we're just exhausting the immune system and other cells of the body.
Think about it. What if headquarters kept giving the Navy SEALs wrong commands for the same command over and over and over?
Producing too many messages can be confusing for the body, and there may be some discoordination.
However, it's the slow burn, the uncontrolled chronic low inflammation that then sets us up for just about every chronic disease that there is out there. When you think about all the chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune disease, cancer, you cut across, even obesity, inflammation, chronic low burn inflammation is sort of at the base as a cause for all of those. And so we have to think about, well, what's creating that low, slow burn, and how do we manage that? Because inflammation is crucial, right? And so when I think about that chronic inflammation, it's basically we have some sort of ongoing trauma that we're doing to the body that's causing it to constantly have a little bit of a reaction causing, and that inflammation that's constantly there, that little bit of a reaction that's constantly there, can make you fatigued. Your body's constantly in a little bit of a battle, trying to control whatever those insults were, and those insults can be in multiple things. Environmental toxins, it can be the food that you're eating, it can be the stress, it can be the lack of sleep. All of these things, again, can be the cause of this low-grade inflammation.
Inflammatory diseases reflects the fact that in certain situations, particularly coming from lifestyle factors, inflammation can become something that doesn't turn itself off, isn't turned off properly when it should have been. So we need inflammation to be turned on at the right times. We need it to turn off when the damage has been resolved, when the infection is gone. When inflammation stays turned on or functions in an out-of-control way, then it really causes damage to a lot of systems in the body and puts us at risk for various diseases that have inflammation sort of at their core. Inflammation is an important factor in the diseases I treat. So probably the most common disease I treat is type 2 diabetes, and it makes up probably at least half of my visits every day. And inflammation is a key component of type 2 diabetes, both in how it begins and how it's sort of propagated or made worse. And inflammation is an important process that makes diabetes hard to treat and hard to reverse, although that's all possible. When we're talking about chronic inflammatory diseases, we mentioned type 2 diabetes. Heart disease and stroke, both are diseases involving inflammation of blood vessels. Obesity is a disease of chronic inflammation. So is Alzheimer's disease. And cancers have an important factor of inflammation that feeds them or promotes the possibility of cancer growing. So yet again, maybe perhaps all of the top killers of people in the Western world anyway are closely tied to inflammation.
Next, we're going to hear from psychiatrist Dr. Binus. I asked him if inflammation is an underlying problem in the conditions he treats.
There are a lot of studies that actually point that direction. But I think we need to be a little bit careful because not all psychiatric disorders, or maybe put it this way, not all people that have depression, for example, are overinflamed. There's actually, so what they've shown is that when you do research and you give people more inflammation, that it can definitely increase the likelihood that they develop depression, anxiety disorders, and other mental health problems. However, not everybody that has a lot of inflammation has mental health disorders, and there are people that have serious mental health disorders like really bad schizophrenia or very bad bipolar, and their levels of inflammation are actually quite low. So what we see is that it seems like there's a subset of people that are more sensitive to the inflammation, and then that can really trigger more mental health problems and trigger depression or bipolar or whatever it might be. But there's other people, it seems like they have a bit more resilience and it doesn't affect them as much. Now, that being said, inflammation, I believe, is always important, and we want to regulate that because even though it might not right away push someone over the edge into a mental health problem, it can be part of the triggers, and eventually, if you keep getting hit with one problem after another, it will eventually push anyone over the edge, and then they'll develop a mental illness. And inflammation can certainly be one of those factors.
Very interesting. I also asked neurologist Dr. Shirzai about the impact of physical trauma to the brain, as it's unfortunately a fairly common cause of brain inflammation.
Yes, when people have a traumatic brain injury, depending on the extent of the injury, it could be a physical injury where you actually see physical damage to the brain, to the neurons and their connections, or it could be subtle enough that it only causes axonal damage and injury and constant inflammation. There have been studies that have looked at specific types of neuroimaging in the brain where inflammation was the most prominent byproduct or activity after traumatic brain injury. And, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, it's being studied in people who have had multiple head injuries, and it seems that predominantly it's inflammation that causes most of the damage.
Inflammation is a common denominator to many diagnoses, and it's not what you were made for. No, you were made for health.
That was a lot of information, wasn't it? I guess I should use this first when I say that was a lot of information. So I gave you a handout, and I see Carla back there who didn't get one, and you didn't get one either. I've got 2 left here. Yeah, thanks, Denise. So what I like to do, I review these in advance, and I essentially put on paper all those little sidebar comments and hand them out to you so that you can kind of do a review, go home and remember a little bit more than you might otherwise. And I just want to read through these because these were some really important points today, I think, especially in my opinion, from the standpoint that we can now go to our doctors. We can ask a little bit more about some of the tests that are available, especially if we've had questions or concerns about our own health. So starting with number 1, markers of inflammation. There are 3 listed there: CRP, IL-6, TNF-A. And some are from these are from a family of cytokines. They are the language of the immune system, and there are tests for these markers available to us. Number 2, inflammation and heart health tests include high sensitivity CRP, which is cardiac C-reactive protein, which detects elevated levels of CRP. And these elevated levels indicate an increased risk for heart conditions. Interleukin 6, which is IL-6, and the tumor necrosis factor alpha, which abbreviated TNF-A. The presence of even one marker can indicate chronic inflammation. A high CRP is indicative of more cardiac risk than high cholesterol. Who'd have thought? I didn't. So I have some questions for my doctor. It says one woman in 31 will die of breast cancer, but 1 in 3 will die of heart disease. Yeah. Any more? Okay. So under 3, heart attack. 50% of men experience heart attacks without prior symptoms, whereas 64% of women face the same threat. Lipids, such as cholesterol levels, are a small indicator of heart health status. An advanced lipid panel reveals more detail, and simply knowing the amount and type of cholesterol doesn't provide a full understanding of cardiovascular health. Number 4, there's the Cleveland Heart Lab Advanced Cardio Tests, and they will measure 1, a TMAO, which is a molecule-linked heart disease, 2, byproducts of endothelial dysfunction, such as ApoB, which is more critical than LDL cholesterol. And she mentioned, but I don't have written down on your sheet, high sensitivity CRP. That was mentioned up above in number 2. And number 5, urine tests can also give us an indicator. Dysfunctional endothelium, remember that's that little 1-cell lining on the inside of all of our veins and blood vessels. Let's see. Dysfunctional endothelium can leak proteins such as albumin. Elevated microalbumin in urine can indicate endothelial disease, distress, disease, one and the same. Number 6, cardiovascular disease is an inflammatory disease. Nitric oxide is produced by endothelial cells to minimize oxidative stress. That little guy named Ross we've learned of. It can reduce inflammation and blood vessel scarring, and it dilates the arteries, thus reducing blood pressure. And the health of endothelial cells is key to preventing heart disease. And we learned that eating green leafy vegetables improves nitric oxide production in the cells. And also from reading that I've done in the past, beets, red beets, provide a good supply of nitric oxide. Number 7, inflammation is crucial to healing and to life. However, constant inflammation becomes damaging. There are 4 mechanisms that damage the brain. They are inflammation, oxidation, lipid dysregulation, and glucose dysregulation, which is the same as insulin resistance. And even elevated sugar levels, which is prediabetes, and oral health problems like gingivitis create inflammation in the body and can lead to these other more complicated problems. Number 9, lipid dysregulation affects dementia risk. Studies consistently indicate that elevated cholesterol increases dementia and Alzheimer's risk 57%. I think that's huge. Borderline elevated cholesterol levels raise the risk 35%. I need to see my doctor. Okay, number 10, excessive cytokines boost inflammation. That was mentioned up above too, the cytokines in one of the, some of those cytokines in number 1, markers of inflammation is named up there. They misdirect immune cells and weaken ability to fight cancer. We must avoid exhausting the immune system with constant battle against minor inflammations. What's creating the low, slow burn of minor inflammation? It can originate from multiple insults to the body, such as environmental toxins, diet and food choices, chronic stress, and insufficient sleep. And I suspect there's maybe more that could be listed, but that was included on the slides up there. Inflammation, number 12, initiates and exacerbates type 2 diabetes, complicating its treatment and reversal. And number 13, inflammation and diseases. Type 2 diabetes is driven by inflammation. Heart disease and stroke is linked to inflamed vessels. Obesity is a case of chronic inflammation. Alzheimer's has an inflammation component, and cancers are fueled by inflammation. So I say, let's figure out how to get rid of our inflammation, because I think every one of us has some that we can relate to right now. So I hope you all enjoyed that, and it's time now for our prayer part of our meeting.
Well, I got a little bit to say about this. You know, my family, it runs high diabetes, heart trouble, and Alzheimer's. I've had 4 members of my family, count my mom and dad, 9 of us have had Alzheimer's. I don't know how many has had diabetes, but I have to really watch out for some of these things. But I started attending the Adventist church in 1974. And I started learning these things. So I asked them, well, why do I need to know these here? They said, well, it will help you think better and live longer and die healthy. I said, well, I'll go for that. So I decided I was going vegetarian, and I did in a very short time. Come to find out, this was a branch Sabbath school that I came in through. I was the only vegetarian in the church. But I kept going all these years. You know, of course, I haven't been a real fanatic on, I've always believed in a roundabout balanced diet, you know, without the bad stuff. Just throw them out the door. And now, here I am, almost 83. Next month, on this day, I'll be 83. And I'm doing pretty good, but there's some weak spots, you know. My heart's not just right. Well, I had an open heart surgery, 5-way bypass, but recovered from it just fantastically. But now I got it doesn't tick just right sometimes. And I may have some other problems, but for me, watching these, we've only seen 5. And I realize everything plays a part in it. And then this information really got me when I watched this in here. That may be one of the reasons I had an open heart surgery. I didn't know this part of it. I'd been watching it better. So we got to watch everything. That's why Deborah and I wanted to present these to the church. So you'll have a heads up on what's happening with all these different parts. You know, like I said earlier, I always compare it to a car. At one time, I was a pretty good mechanic. Now I don't know what to do. But one thing always led to something else, breaking down. And I would learn what that was. If this happened, I say, well, in a week or 2, this is probably going to happen. But anyway, besides that, I have learned a lot in just 5 nights. Now, for the next 2 weeks, this will be our last meeting until January the 7th, because I don't think anybody wants to come here on Christmas, do they? That's next Tuesday. You know, New Year's Eve, you shouldn't be out of your house. Not safe. And that's the following Tuesday. And then the next open Tuesday is January the 7th. So, you know, you can go on with these sheets and these things that Deborah was talking about. You know, you can just Google these and go to one of the famous hospitals and whatever, and you get great answers telling you more about it. Because if you're like me, I had to hear something 3 or 4 times before it even starts penetrating his head. Then finally it will get in. I know what's going on. So now, I want to ask this again about prayer. I would like to set, I'm going to ask each one of you for prayer requests here in a moment, okay? One special thing, like what could happen in this town that you don't think will ever happen? In any town, what do you think would never happen? They go Republican? No. But I've done this, I said this before, I've done this in several churches. And after a week or so, those prayers were answered. One time we asked for the crime rate, and I believe this was in Susanville, the drop. Within 3 weeks, it dropped 50%. And so God does these things so we'll understand how important prayer is. And that's all. And one day maybe I'll give a class on prayers. There's some good classes on that, how to pray. In some ways you shouldn't pray. But I won't do it today. I'm going to ask, okay, we're just going to ask that for the crime rate to drop here in Carson City, because I know it's on the rise. I did. That is my prayer, and I pray that right because I know that's the answer to all the things. Okay, who else has a prayer request, or just tell something about a prayer that's happened to you?
I had some monetary issues, and I promised God that I would continue to do whatever he wanted me to do, no matter what. And I didn't know if I was ever going to have enough gas. And I kept on asking God, God, you're in charge. And not since the very day I made that promise, but God has absolutely made sure I have, even if I got down here on nothing, he always made sure I had gas to get home and back again. I have not had an absolutely empty tank since. God is good, and I am just standing in awe.
Someone else? You get to talk in the red microphone.
So we can all hear you.
If you don't, I'm going to tell stories. That's all I know. I can do that. We had something amazing happen to us. And I can tell you this, if I tell you this story, there's going to be a lot of Mormons switching over to Adventists. And the reason I tell you that, coming back from Hawaii, this guy was sitting next to me, and he had one little boy. Then his wife was sitting next to Deborah on the other aisle, and another little boy. Well, we got to talking and got to be pretty friendly. And finally, somebody came out that he was a Mormon. Well, because he was really clean, cooking, talking, and seemed to behave. And I asked him, was he a Christian yet? And he says, yeah, I'm a Mormon. So we got to talking about that quite a bit. And I brought up that our church has similar health laws that your church teaches. He says, I didn't know that. He says, oh, yeah. I said, we have a big health program. And I said, my wife and I, we're in the head of the lifestyle of that church. And so that was fine. That went really good. And then Deborah was sitting by the wife, and they got to talking. Okay, we changed planes in Oakland. Guess what? A young girl, she's a freshman in college. I asked her, is she a Christian? And we got to talking. I don't always do that. She says, yeah. No, it's not what I did. That come later. I said, I'm Jerry, and that's my wife, Deborah, and here's the way it works. She makes friends with you, then I'm going to preach to you the rest of the flight. She says, go ahead. I said, no, I won't do it, but I gave her some advice for life, you know. And then I told her, you know, be sure and leave God in your life and read only the Bible. I said, a lot of these churches are teaching weird things that's not in the Bible. So be sure you read the Bible and the Bible only. And come to find out, she was a Mormon girl. And then I told her about our health message. She says, I didn't know that. So, folks, we need to get it out there. But the reason I say that wouldn't just have happened to Deborah and I. It's God don't work that way. He's probably doing this all over the world, putting us in contact with other denominations. And maybe that's why I say the Mormons, he won't send people. He wants everybody to be in his kingdom. And since they are already got the conquer on the diet and all this stuff, I just know. I wish I had some way to find out, but I wouldn't dare put it out on the internet. If you met a Mormon lady, let me know. So, was someone?
So I want to add one thing that when I was sitting next to the woman on the airplane, a lot of times I take on the airplanes with me some religious book that I will read or at least have open. And sure enough, this was probably the first time. We don't fly that often, by the way, but anyway, this was the first time that she looked over, saw the title on the book, which was a John Bradshaw, Confidence in Chaos is the title. And she said, oh, is that a good book? Because the title really caught her attention, and I was able to give that book to her before we left. So, yeah, praise God.
Oh, any more? I can't see the clock. Okay.
So who do we want to put on our prayer list tonight? Starting with Carol Lee. I'll add her name first. Yes, and Sue.
Well, we visit Lord and Betty today, and physically she looks good. Mentally, she has Alzheimer's, but she's not real severe yet. And we had a good visit with her. So
yeah, and oh yes, Mary, of course, and along with Mary's needs, I mean there were.
Put Carol Lee on there.
Yes, there were 16 people. Yes, and Pastor, there were 16 names that we provided, like care baskets to Christmas baskets, and so God knows all of those 16 names. I couldn't tell you all 16, but we'll include those that we prepared all the gift baskets for tonight. No.
We need to go see her. She lives down in Gardnerville.
Yeah, so she was one of the 16 names. Yeah,
and we visited her way back and talked to her in church a couple of times.
Okay, any other names? Yes, Theta and her husband.
Yeah, we still got a lot of members out here pretty well housebound because of their illnesses and different things. And I tried to get a church list, but we don't have a church list of all the people and their addresses.
Okay, Jamie.
I'm sorry, I was talking on top of you.
Well, we're going to add Jamie Carroll to our list as well, and Sigrid.
So you're well, you know, we have a lot of young people come to this church now. It's so good to see them young faces walking around here. We need to really put them in our prayer list. Some of them are kin to this lady right here.
Oh, hey, I want y'all to know that Alice's grandson came to the gift basket party and helped with that, and I think enjoyed himself, didn't he? Jesse. Yeah, Jesse.
Yeah. So,
oh, one more thought. We were asking about what could we pray for, and we've done this before in past churches to that might be above and beyond expectation. I'd like to see our number grow to 20 people coming to midweek Bible study and prayer. How about that? Let's pray for that.
well, these prayers you pray every night. Every day you think about them. Put them on your refrigerator. Write them on your bathroom mirror with erasable markers. That's where my notes go. Okay.
How did the interest list develop? Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Our interest list has just grown from every outreach we've done then. Great.
Well, we'll pray for 20 people be here. Not us, not counting. No, counting us. Yeah.
Total of 20 would
Okay.
be a good start.
Okay, who would like to lead out?
We thank you, Lord, for bringing us all together tonight and for just helping us to keep in mind all of the friends and, those missing from our pews due to illness. We're lifting up, in particular, Carol Lee and Sue, Betty, Mary, Pastor Manny, Amy, and a host of other people who have all come together on an interest list from outreach that we've done. Lord, our greatest desire is to bring those who just haven't made a decision yet for you. They're on a fence and they need to accept Jesus fully into their lives. And we're praying for decisions for membership in our church as well. And we just lift everyone up to you and ask for blessing in Jesus' name.